always been an expanding university, constantly moving forward. But as we move forward, we must also look back to where we began. Let's go back in time with the people who remember UNO the way it was. Join us for Reflections in Time.
It's a beautiful spring morning in the year 1989, and it's really an exciting morning for me. I'm in a lovely home near the University of Nebraska at Omaha, or the University of Omaha as you choose, campus. And I'm with a friend of mine and a former colleague, and we're just about ready to do a part of the series I've been working on for a lot of years at the university called Reflections in Time. Today I'm going to visit with the former Dean of Women and a member of our speech faculty at the University of Omaha, Elizabeth Hill. Elizabeth, it's so nice to be in your home.
It's wonderful to have you, Paul.
And it's just so nice to be with you again. And what I want to do is just pick your brain, your mind, going back into history. Now we'll dig around for a while and talk about yourself and the university and what things were like and the way they are today, too. Is that all right?
Fine. I love it.
Good. You know, for all the years you and I have known each other, and it's been a bunch, I don't know that we ever discussed your early life. You came to the university and we became acquainted as colleagues in the speech department, but where did Elizabeth Hill come from?
Well, I was born in a little town in Kansas, Ellsworth, Kansas. My father was a shoe salesman, traveled from Kansas City down to Guadalajara, Mexico.
Oh.
And in fact, he sold shoes to Pancho Villa's army at one time. And one time he came home from his travels, and my brother and I didn't recognize him because he'd grown a mustache. Well, when that happened, he said, "That's enough. I'm leaving the road." And so we moved to Kansas City, and he became the manager rather than just a salesman. He managed the salesman in McElwain Barton Shoe Company.
Able to stay at home more.
And we stayed at home more. And so I started in the 3rd grade in Kansas City. I'd gone first 2 in Ellsworth, and started the 3rd grade in Kansas City and went through high school, and then went to Stevens College for 2
fine
years.
School still, yeah.
Delightful school, wonderful school. In fact, my great niece is going there to school this fall, which is going to be fun.
Oh, yes.
And then from there, I went over to the University of Missouri, which was logical because it was so close, and got my bachelor's there in music and speech and education.
Oh, I didn't know you had that musical tie-in.
Well, yes, but I don't tell that one. And Mother was not well, and we felt it was better for me to be close at home, so I went to the conservatory in Kansas City and took a BFA there.
Oh, did you?
And then taught there for a number of years. And then the Depression came along.
What sorts of things did you teach?
I taught interpretive reading to youngsters. I had lots of children. In fact, I had Lana Turner at one time when she was a little girl.
Is that right?
And studied myself, too. And then the Depression came, and I taught at St. Teresa's Junior College for Girls in Kansas City. And at that time, many of the girls were scheduled to go back east to school, but they weren't sure where the money was coming from for their tuition for the rest of the years. So they needed someone with degrees in speech so that if one wanted to transfer, they could. So I taught there and enjoyed it very much. It was a wonderful experience for me. Wonderful nuns. It was a St. Joseph order. So that was an exciting time. And I took my debate team to Northwestern at that time. In the summertime, they had a program where you could get your tuition free if you brought your debate team for the summer.
What year would this have been about, Elizabeth?
31.
In the good old Depression days, yeah.
Yes.
Right.
And so we went back there for 2 summers with my debate team, and I started my master's degree at Northwestern.
Northwestern.
It was an exciting time. Edgar Bergen was one of the, well, he was on the faculty part-time.
Oh.
And we had our luncheons at the Old Orrington Hotel in Evanston, which was fun.
Yeah.
And Ralph Dennis was dean of the college then. And then an opening came, and they never had a Northwestern speech person at Hinsdale, Illinois.
Hmm.
So this happened in the middle of the, between 35 and 36. And they sent me out to apply for the job, and I got it. So I left the university as a full-time student and went to Hinsdale to teach. And I was there until the war broke out.
Things like debate and public speaking, things like
Yes,
that?
and I coached the plays.
Oh, you did?
And,
you were a
yeah.
director.
I directed the plays. Nothing like Ed Clark could do, I must admit, because he was a superb director of plays.
Yes.
But that was a wonderful experience. And
You
I
were getting a
enjoyed
wide
it.
variety of background here, weren't you, so far?
Yes, it had been an exciting background, really, Paul. And I loved Evanston. I think it's a delightful place
I agree.
to live.
Yes, lovely place.
So
You know, one thing I wanted to ask you before we went on in your personal history there, how was it? Were there some factors in your life, people, whatever, that helped you decide you wanted to teach? What brought you into teaching as opposed to something else?
My father felt that teaching was a wonderful profession for women. I would like to have gone into business, I think, because certainly the money was better later on than the teaching profession has ever been until more recent years.
Yes, yes.
And I thought many times that I would like to do merchandising.
Mm-hmm.
And I did for a while. After the war, I went to Sparks Vanderbilt Barney in St. Louis and was trained the personnel in sales. And that was exciting.
Working in communication again in a different way. I interrupted you there and going back into how you got into it, but you were at Hillsdale.
Hinsdale.
Hinsdale, right.
Hinsdale,
I want to
Illinois.
say Hill.
It's a suburb of Chicago,
Yes,
you know.
right.
And I enjoyed that very much. And then I thought I would try business after the war, but I wasn't happy. I wanted to get back into education. And so one of the faculty members at Hinsdale knew of the vacancy at William Woods College, and they were looking for a dean of women. And in fact, Tom Bonner and I landed on the William Woods campus at in the same year, in '51. He was just out of graduate school at Northwestern, and he was the academic dean, and I was the dean of women.
Oh, for heaven's sake.
So that was a wonderful friendship beginning at William Woods College.
And you stayed there then for a
Until
while?
'54. And then I decided I wanted a master's in personnel and guidance, which I didn't have. So I went back to Missouri, to Columbia, and which was only, you know, a short distance from Fulton. And I had taken some courses during my years at William Woods College. And so I didn't have too much to do. So I went over to Columbia, and fortunately, they asked me at Stevens to be the alumni secretary. And so while I was going to school, I was working for Stevens.
That was a nice arrangement.
Wasn't it?
Fine.
Wonderful arrangement.
You seem to fall into things very nicely.
Don't I? I think
along.
I must be at the right time and the right place merge, I expect. And I'm sure it was through Tom Bonner, Paul, that I came to the university here.
I wondered where the tie-in
because he had come up here when I left to go on with my master's degree in personnel. He left William Woods and came up here.
Oh, did he?
In the history department. I think Stan Trickett probably hired him, I don't know.
Could well have been.
But I would assume it was he. And I was at an alumni secretary's meeting in French Lick, Indiana. Or is it French Lick Springs?
No,
I don't remember.
I think you're right, French Lick, Indiana.
And the telephone call came at the last day of the conference, and it was Dr. Bale calling, asking me when I could come up for an interview. Well, that was a shock, because I knew my resumes had gone out from the university to other schools, but I hadn't put Omaha on it or anything like that.
No.
and wanted to know if I could be on the campus Monday, the following Monday.
That sounds like my life.
Doesn't it? For an interview. Well, I said I was in French Lick, Indiana. I didn't know whether I could make it or not, but I would see if it were possible to do that. And at that time, we had a private plane at Stevens College that you could hire yourself if you had a conference that you had to go to. You could take care of that yourself and go.
Mm-hmm.
So I said, well, I'll have to find out, because I don't know how to get to Omaha in the first place from Columbia. So I called the campus, and they said, yes, I could. The plane was free. I could have it for the following Monday to come up for an interview.
Mm-hmm.
So I flew back to St. Louis, took the bus, as we usually did on trips like that, back to Columbia, and then came up here Monday morning for the interview.
First experience in coming to Omaha. Never been here before.
I never counted so many cattle and horses in fields, because, you know, it was a little puddle jumper.
You were right down there.
And we were right down there with them. So that was my introduction to Omaha. But I'm sure it was Tom who had recommended to Dr. Bale, if he was looking for someone, that perhaps I would be available.
Well, and I suppose your first impression of the university really came from, first, your phone call with Dr. Bale, and then you came to see him and other people. Remember that first experience, what it was like?
Have you ever got, I don't know what you faculty members had to do with anyone in the administration. You were just scheduled with all of the deans. I'm sure that's the way it goes.
It's still the way it goes, pretty much that way now in many shops.
You just bing, bing, bing down the line. And then you have luncheon with them, and then you go back to the respective dean under whom you'll be working. So I went back with Jay McGregor after lunch.
Oh, what a lovely man.
And had a delightful time with him.
All times with that man were delightful.
Yeah. Wonderful couple.
What did you think of Bale when you first got into the office, eyeball to eyeball with him?
Well, it's a little bit startling. Of course, I was used to a father who would, you know, sort of say, this is the way we do it, this is the way we do it. And that index finger of Milo Bale's was powerful. I can remember that.
Yeah.
So, but it was very pleasant, and it was lots of fun after I relaxed, and I had a good time visiting with, let's see, it was Dean Lucas at that time, and Dean Thompson. Helmstetter
in business.
Yes, and
applied arts, rather.
Applied arts. Helmstetter was applied arts, wasn't he?
Yes.
And Thompson. And
probably Dr. Robinson, graduate study.
Yes. And then Dean McGregor and his staff.
But you were going to be working with McGregor.
And by the time I took the plane at 4:30, Dean McGregor drove me to the airport and offered me the position, which was an exciting thing.
Well, yes.
And I said, well, it sounded exciting to me, but I would have to see how soon I could be released, because, heavens, that was the middle of summer.
Oh, yeah.
You see, it was the latter part of June or July. And I think Mary Perdue Young was my predecessor, was her name. And she had taken a position at Yankton.
With Yankton College?
So that was the way that moved.
Were you going to come as Dean of Women and also to teach with us in the speech
program? You know, in those days, Milo felt that every administrator should teach, which I think is a wonderful idea.
Teach at least one class, right?
One class a semester. And I like that. Because, you know, when you say Dean of Students or Dean of Women, everybody says, oh, I can't stand it. Don't want to go in those offices. And so, you know, I think they see you in a different light as a teacher lots of times.
Well, you decided to come, right?
I decided to come.
Before you left, or did you go home and think about it a while?
No, I didn't think about it. It was close enough to Kansas City, and I needed to keep that in mind. And I fell in love with the campus. I thought that administration building was one of the most beautiful things I'd ever seen on a campus. Yes, it is, Paul.
Yeah,
it truly is.
But the campus was different then, wasn't it, Elizabeth?
Weren't you here when we had the student shack?
Oh, indeed I was.
Oh, my heavens.
That was one of those temporary permanent buildings, wasn't
When
it?
I walked into that, I thought, well, now, I don't know about this, because, you know, to come from a boarding school campus
And a lovely one.
and a city university
Yeah.
was quite a change in that respect.
Oh, indeed so. And a live-in campus.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, this was
But
different.
so many things compensated for that. I think our type of student was exceptional, and I'm sure it still is today. But I thought the students were really wonderful. I enjoyed them very much.
You know, I want to ask you about that, Elizabeth. You had come from both a life as a student and a teacher and a dean at more private kind of campuses in school. Did you notice as you first came and over the years when you were here any overall difference between the type of student at the two campuses? Or?
Well, I think the fact that so many of the students at the University of Omaha in those days were working, had part-time jobs, which was a new experience for me.
Still the case.
And I admire that. And I always felt that way, particularly about my night classes, Paul. Any young man or woman who works all day from 8 to 5 or whatever it is and wants to come out for a night class, I take my hat off to them. I admire them tremendously. And I felt that way about this student body, too. Although it used to be difficult in the dean's office because, you know, that's where the parking permits were granted. And they had to have their cars because they had to get to work immediately afterward. They couldn't come with anybody else. They couldn't ride the bus. We had to have plenty of space for the students.
Always a problem.
And I imagine it is today because they're parked all over Elmwood Park right now.
Yes, no, it's still a problem, and partly in good measure because of what you say. The working student has to get off to work and that sort of thing.
That's right. And going back to the students, Paul, I think that makes them, as a rule, a pretty special kind of a person. They want their education very badly. Not that the girls that I've known or the boys at Westminster, but it's a different philosophy that they build within themselves, don't you think?
Yes, I think they come to us often with more of a sense of responsibility.
I do,
than
too.
a student right out of home in high school off to another campus.
That's right.
Yeah. No, we've been fortunate in that, in the type of student we've been able to work with. I agree with you.
I think that the biggest boon to my way of thinking was the building of the student union. That was wonderful, especially for our office, because when you coordinated all of your clubs, and here we were meeting in Quonset huts, and do they still have the Quonset huts?
No, I think if you came around campus right now, you would have trouble finding anything that resembled one. The last ones, remember parking lot A?
That the faculty.
Right.
For the
that
faculty.
was filled with them, and they're all gone. It's a nice parking lot and drive-up area.
I
now.
don't very often go by that way, so
No?
I don't know what's going on
The
there.
campus is mainly brick and mortar now.
Well, I need a popcorn trail to get around the campus now.
Oh, it has changed so much. And the student body was not so large either in those days. Now it's about 15,000 students. When you and I were there together, why, it was more like 4 or 5 at most, counting the evening students, right?
That's right. And of course now we don't have the bootstrap program, which was quite an asset.
Oh, it was a tremendous program, and that made for an interesting part of the student body too, didn't it?
Didn't it though? It made the boys work a whole lot harder, I know that. Their grades were a little bit sad.
No, they were great on motivating people generally to work hard.
And I thought they were, as a group, a very interesting group.
Yes, I tend to agree. Now, one thing you needed to do as you came to work at the university was balance your life, your work, professional life, between being a dean and being a teacher. Let's talk about those two parts, maybe separately, maybe together. Your role here at this university, a place where we didn't have dormitories, tell us about your role in relationship with the women in terms of being their dean.
Well, I think that was very much a challenge to me, because you didn't see the girls as often as you did on a campus like William Woods or Stevens. So you made the most of every minute. I mean, if a girl came in to talk to you or visit with you, you really had to be on your toes to really find out about this girl. And she was wondering what I was like, too, I'm sure.
Sure.
And as a dean, you know, you're in charge of various women's groups like Alpha Lambda Delta and the women's honorary, the senior honorary, and you had to make every minute count. That's the only way I can say. And I think I did pretty well. I think I was fairly fortunate with my interviews and my contacts with the students. And sometimes I think they wondered exactly what I was like, because somebody had given me a darling English bull puppy, and I just couldn't stand to leave Tilly at home. So when she was a puppy, I'd bring her up to the office and put her under my desk.
What did Dr. Bale think of that?
He didn't know it. And at least if he did, he didn't say anything. And then we'd take a walk on the campus at noon or at the coffee breaks in the morning. And so that was an interesting experience too. And it was just like Lois Lucas, who used to teach at West Side. Mm-hmm. They had a rabbit in the biology department that used to hop down the hall and sit under her desk. And when I went out as the dean of women to talk to the high school counselor for girls, all of a sudden I looked down and here was this white rabbit sitting under her desk. I'm sure the students felt sometimes when they looked at Cricket or Tilly in those days, they wondered, what in the world's this dean like? She's got the puppy with her. And then, you know, you sponsored Panhellenic as well as other clubs. So I really think it helped to teach, Paul, and to have that position.
You know, it would seem to me, and I don't think you and I ever discussed this, that to be a dean of women, try to help them, encourage them, counsel them, would be almost more difficult when they were in encouragement of sorority life and club life, when people had so many other varied interests and they lived at home often.
They did, but I didn't think that was a very difficult problem to solve, because they were always willing to make time for it someplace if they had a job assignment to do. And I thoroughly enjoyed that part of the position. And then I think it wasn't only what I was doing on campus, but you know how Dr. Bale felt that you had to participate in community things, too. So I joined the Women's Division of the Chamber of Commerce and eventually became president of that for a year. Mm-hmm. And that gave me a chance to meet people in town, and also it gave me a chance maybe for parents to know me a little bit better through what I was trying to do in that position. And I think that helped. Mm-hmm. I didn't know many of the parents because we didn't have, you know, parents coming to visit us on campus. The only thing you had was if there was a style show of some kind from the home ec department. You got to meet some of the parents in that group of the girls who were modeling their clothes.
And those used to be nice events.
I beg your pardon?
And those used to be very nice events.
Oh, they were wonderful events.
Shows and so.
And so I really found it quite manageable. So, and I hope the students did too.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know.
But then, along with that, and I wanted to ask you about that next, Elizabeth, was your role in our Department of Speech, as we call it, speech and drama, as we called it.
Speech and drama we had then, didn't we?
We had an interesting group of people, faculty-wise, and
we did. And it was fun to hear about some of them before we started this, because I've lost track of many of them. And it was a good, strong department, didn't you think, Paul?
Yes, yes. We had a variety of people, a variety of characters, let's say, in some cases.
Yes, and I think of some of them as I look at the television screen today, and I think about the boys that you trained as cameramen and crew, and also, you know, Carol Schrader, and some of the girls that I remember.
Harry Forsberg and other people.
Oh, oh dear.
Yeah, we have a lot of them around the city now, don't we?
But it must be a great satisfaction to you, Paul, to see those young students as they were when you started with them, and see what they've become to this by now in the city.
That's part of the pay of teaching, isn't it?
I think it's a great part of it. Seeing the results. I'm always happy to have the students come back in the summer. Judy Moe is probably one of the more faithful ones. Yeah. She visits her parents every summer, sometimes at Christmas, and I always have a good visit with her. So it's fun to keep track of them through the years.
When a student comes back and makes a point of looking you up, that's a special thrill, isn't it?
It's a special thrill, Paul.
Yeah.
And I'm always happy when homecoming is on. And
oh, yeah.
you go out and see them then.
One thing about teaching, and we were talking about it really here as we visit here about remembering folks, is the relationship with students. I wondered, over and above that, Elizabeth, and you did it for so many years, what were some of the other rewards of teaching that you felt were a part of your life?
Well, I have a philosophy about that. I think each one of us has to feel that we're in the process of becoming. We never absolutely arrive. We're always striving to become, and I think that's the biggest challenge to me in my relationship with students through the years. Never lose track of that. So many experiences will be a part of that, but never be satisfied with just where you are. You're always in the process of becoming.
Growth and change.
That's right.
And that's part of the excitement of it.
And
all,
that's
isn't
one
it?
thing about speech, Paul, I've always felt. You know, to be well verbalized, to be articulate, to be understood. And I think that's all part of the picture.
And if you do it well, it's hard to live, isn't it? It really is.
Well, really, in today's world, particularly. And I always felt that that was one of the reasons why we had good enrollment in the speech classes. It wasn't because we were easy, it was because they could see what we were hoping they would do and become.
Yeah. Remember any interesting students that stand out in classes that you taught? Or?
Oh, I remember when we were doing this section in the book on how to do things and explain something. This one lad in the night class, his father must have been in the sausage making business. And you know how you put the casing on, you get the sausage. He brought that whole equipment to class one night. And we had a demonstration of how to make sausage. And that was delightful. The class enjoyed it tremendously. But yes, I think that was exciting. I remember that. But I don't know that there were any other particularly outstanding.
Oh, maybe one will come as we visit here.
I hope so.
I think one of the things you've touched on, some of them, but one of the exciting things about coming to the campus would be the people and the faculty and staff that we'd run into in the club room at noon or whatever.
That's right.
And as you think back, it's a few years now since you retired. What year did you retire?
71.
Yeah.
You see, I retired in 70 from the administrative position, but I stayed on for another year to teach.
All right, now let's go back and wander through your memory of people. You mentioned some of them, and anything that comes to mind. Some of the people and incidents, anything like that that kind of stand out in your memory.
Well, you know, now he's left I can't even think of his name.
What did he do?
Humanities.
Oh, Dr. Wilfred
Dr.
Payne.
Wilfred Payne. Well, he was my backyard neighbor.
Was he?
So when I moved over to this house, we would meet down at Happy Hollow Boulevard and walk up to campus together. And at that time, there was a suspension bridge across that old creek down there.
Yes, yes.
Well, we used that as long as we could until it fell apart. And then we'd have to walk around and walk the long way up. And certainly I admired him tremendously.
Did you get some interesting lectures on the way up to campus?
Yes. Oh, yes. You know, he had a whole pipe organ torn apart, piece by piece in his basement. I don't know how.
I heard he was a pipe organ addict.
And loved it. And then I remember you faculty men, which always used to gall me considerably, you had a group called the Men of Gold.
Oh, I didn't belong, but I know of it, yes.
Well, of course, that was a very sacred group.
Oh, yes.
And I just, the women, we never came up with a good enough name to match the Men of Gold because you'd taken that name first. We thought we were equal value.
That included people like Wilfred Payne and a few others of his friends.
Jay McGregor, and Ralph Wardle, and Bob Harper. And I think in later years, Bruce Baker was probably, I don't know whether they still have it or not.
No, they don't.
But wasn't that dining room impossible there in the administration building?
But that was our place to eat.
Well, the only place to eat.
Yeah.
And the cafeteria for the students across from it was equally impossible, too.
But our life was mainly in that building.
Oh,
if you
well,
remember.
we were all in there.
Yeah.
Excepting when Ellen got the new library and
Yes.
moved out and gave us all of that space.
That gave us more space and an exciting new building to go to.
Yes.
Yeah.
And now that's the administration
Yes,
building, isn't
and
it?
there's another larger and more lovely library even so, and it's very nice, and that's running out of space now.
I'm sure that's
Yeah.
true.
Now you mentioned fondly earlier the man you worked for, Jay McGregor. I remember him so well I can still see him. He was a lovely man.
And, you know, that office was so exciting because, not because of what I did or what Don Flaster did or necessarily anything like that, but there was always a constant stream of people in to see Jay McGregor. And you'd hear them laughing back there in that office, and it was just delightful. And he was equally good with students.
He was a real gentleman.
Yes.
In the finest
And a
sense of the word.
gentleman,
Yes,
too.
a gentle man.
Yes.
But you also mentioned another name that I can laugh when I hear him. He was so much fun, and that's Flaster, Don Flaster.
Oh, yes. Oh, yes.
And you were related to him, of course, because he was
Yeah.
Lena Men.
That's right. And, well, you've chaperoned lots of dances, too, at Peony Park. I never go out to Peony Park but for an affair, but what I think how drafty it used to be along that north side. Where
Good
we
way
had,
to lose your hearing.
Yes, one way to lose your hearing is right. You were right up by the band. And,
So drafty.
and, of course, you didn't have to do any chaperoning detail the way you did lots of times. You could just sit there and have a good time and forget what might be going on in the back of Peony Park. You weren't going to worry about that. But that was, and Carter Lake, do you remember Carter Lake when they used to have dances at
Yes,
Carter Lake?
yes.
Those awful stuffed animals that were all, I don't know what, does it still exist? I don't know.
I thought it burned, but then they rebuilt something, but I don't think it exists as it did, at least.
But I hope they didn't put those animals back in there. I don't think they'd ever been dusted. Oh, what a place to get to.
Thelma Engel.
Yes. Thelma was such a help. Oh my, she was a wonderful help.
Really was.
I haven't seen Thelma recently. I saw
have.
her a couple of times last year.
I see her occasionally. She seems fine and enjoying retirement,
Yes. Well, I think we all enjoy retirement. Not that we weren't happy with our work, but retirement has been fun.
too. Any other people you think of at the moment? If not, we can come back to
Stanley Trickett. I think.
Stanley Trickett. No one can forget Stanley.
No. I think the thing I remember about Stanley Trickett is how he used to bug the life out of Ellen to get. Oh, he could spend money better than anybody else as head of a
chairman of the
department.
library committee, wasn't he?
That's right, and of course head of the history department, and that made quite a difference too. But he was always ordering books from Ellen. And then you were talking about one of being with students and counseling them.
Uh-huh.
I remember one student came in, and she was a brilliant girl, but she used to drive, I won't mention names, but Roy Robbins was her teacher.
Yeah.
And she would sit in the back of the class and read something else or not pay any attention to the lectures or anything, and she'd come up with a straight A every time on the examination, and that just drove him crazy. So finally he came in and talked to Jay about it. He said, I just don't understand this student. There's something wrong. I don't know whether she has crib sheets or what she has, but she makes straight A's. She doesn't even take down a thing I say in class. And he said, I wish you'd talk to her. Well, Jay thought maybe I could talk to her first, and I did. Well, she said, it's Breeze. I listen. I don't necessarily take the notes, and I read the books that he tells me to read. She said, I don't want to be disrespectful, but if I've got something else that I have to jot down, I do it. And so we had to square that with Roy because well, of course it is insulting. I'm not saying
Didn't do much for Roy's ego if you could pick it up there.
It didn't do a thing for his ego. But he was so distressed because here she'd come up with a straight A. He couldn't understand it. But she was a good student, and finally Dean McGregor pointed out a few things to her, and that was it. But we never heard anything more from Roy about that.
How about our boss, Al Paul?
Wasn't he great? I enjoyed him, and his wife was so charming.
Lovely person.
Mary Ellen. And, you know, he was particularly close to Fanny Keller, who used to be my secretary in the dean's office. I think they had known each other. Previously in some town that they lived in.
He came from Ames area where he taught, I think.
Yes.
Maybe it was over there. Yeah.
And, oh, she adored Mary Ellen and Al.
Well, as a department head in those days, in a department that included theater and communication, we had some fires to put out now and then, didn't we?
Yes, quite a few. You know, there's something, even though you're in speech and not in drama, there's enough of the ham in each one of us to get a little bit hurt if we think we're not getting what's due us, don't you know?
Yeah. In that department, there were some good egos going.
You bet your life there were. And but they had wonderful productions, and I think good shows, and we held up the communications end pretty well, so it made a good, solid department.
Warren Gore.
Poor Warren. He was brilliant, though, really, I think.
Yes.
Well, I mean, he had a wonderful mind. I don't know whether you'd say he was brilliant, but I bet he doesn't have his doctorate yet.
Well, next year.
Next year. Oh, that sounds familiar. It was always next year. Carting all of these things. How did Kiki ever put up with that?
They had a big house, if you recall.
Yes, over on Cass, wasn't it?
Yes.
Just off of Happy Hollow.
Correct.
You could fall all over cartons any place you went. Oh, that's Warren's material for his dissertation.
Yeah. But what a neat guy to be with, wasn't he? And he was a fine teacher. Well accepted and loved by students, I think.
Yes. Do they still have, you know, your faculties in different departments have your dinners the way we used to, or do you have
No, I don't hear so much of that anymore. The departments are bigger, and there's less social life, I'd say, than we had. We had a great social life, didn't we?
Oh, yes.
We'd have those evenings of fun and frolic.
And even when Al went to, didn't he go to Cincinnati?
He did.
I was there one time.
I was too.
I remember, you've been there too. They were still partying in Cincinnati.
Yes, yes. No, we worked hard, but we also had a lot of fun together as a department.
As a department. Very congenial. Very delightful.
Well, you spent a lot of years at the university, but then it came time in the early 70s to say, hey, I want to retire. And
That's right.
Elizabeth did.
I did.
So what in the world has Elizabeth been doing since 1971?
Well, I'll admit I'm a little bit lazy lots of times. And it's fun not to have to get up and be ready at a set time to get up to the campus. But I've done lots of volunteer work. I like to drive, and fortunately I can still drive.
Great.
And I like to take my friends, and I'm a volunteer for driving people to hospitals and appointments and things who don't drive. And I worked at the gift shop. Well, no, it's not the gift shop, it's the thrift shop over at the medical school. I had a woman who was helping me clean, and she never could think of whistle stop, which is what's called. And she'd say, well, Miss Hill, are you going to the ding-a-ling shop today? So I've always referred to it as a ding-a-ling shop. But Connie Scultetti did a wonderful job in organizing that thrift shop. I think probably they netted $6,000 to $8,000 a year on that thrift shop. Of course, that's one thing about doctors' wives and doctors, you know, they wear pretty sharp-looking clothes, and their children do too, and they're in wonderful condition, and it's very productive in the standpoint of income.
So, in spite of your saying that you're a bit lazy, you've been busy.
Well, I enjoy that, and I like to go to theater and chamber music. I became involved with that at Joslin when it was going, you know, we were given a grant from the Coolidge Foundation to bring in people like the Juilliard and artists of that kind, and I enjoyed working with them. And I don't travel a great deal in distances, excepting in '86. My brother had won a trip because he was pretty good at selling in brokerage business, and he won a trip for two to Hong Kong and Tokyo and Beijing. So he invited me to go with him on that trip.
Great. And you went.
So that was exciting. But, you know, I don't travel a great deal. I'm happy to be at home and enjoy the house.
You sound as though you are content.
I think I would say that, Paul. And we have a wonderful neighborhood here. I think I'm the matriarch of the street, probably. And I'm certainly the one who isn't gainfully I'm not gainfully employed. But they're
You're gainfully unemployed.
Yeah. But they're delightful couples all around me, and they've been very generous with their time and love, and it's been a wonderful experience for me, because, you know, lots of times you're ignored when you're past 50, but that hasn't been my luck in this neighborhood. It's been a wonderful neighborhood to be in.
That sounds marvelous, and it sounds as though you've enjoyed it, and your life generally has been a pattern of activity and enjoyment.
Well, I think I have to be active, Paul. I don't feel that I'd be happy if I wasn't doing something either in church work or civic work of some kind, because that's what you want to do in your profession, is to do your bit as a person, not only as a teacher, but as a part of a community, I think. One thing, I haven't gone into politics. There was too much at the university. I don't want any part of that. So, and I've enjoyed, I'm a member of PEO, and that's been a wonderful experience for me, because they're great women in PEO. And I certainly am proud of Cotty College, which we own, you know, and finance and so forth. And that's been an interesting project, too.
Tell us a little about that project you just touched on. I better put it in the tape here.
Oh, well, you know, it's a junior college at Nevada, Missouri.
Mm-hmm.
And several years ago, the PEOs bought it and took it over to run as their college. And that's been an interesting thing, to get students for Cotty College. And my niece went there for 2 years.
Oh.
So I know a little bit about it, and I've kept up with it. I think at one time, Marion Brown and I were both considered for the presidency of the college, and I thought that was exciting.
Yeah.
One of my co-faculty members out there.
We've done another one of these tapes with her, too.
Isn't she delightful?
Lovely person, indeed she is.
She's
it's
delightful.
Fun to be around.
And last week, when Mrs. Trawick died, and the chapter came over after the services to serve lunch to us, Marion was the one who was here in the house to take charge of it, and it was so good to,
nice.
to have her.
Yeah. Well, I think from what I've listened to as we visited for the last hour or so, is that part of the secret of an enjoyable life is to keep very busy and involved. You've done that, Elizabeth.
Well, thank you, Paul. It's meant a great deal to me, and I've thoroughly enjoyed it. I always thought I'd retire, and when I retired, I would leave and go to Santa Fe or someplace like that. But here I am, 1989, still happy and loving it in Omaha.
You enjoyed Omaha and you stayed here.
That's right. Probably longer than I've stayed in any place in my life, I expect.
Any other last thoughts you want to lay on this tape of yours about people or things, the university, personal life? Anything you might have left out that you'd like to have remembered?
I would like to say, Paul, that I felt that when we were at the University of Omaha, and I'm sure it's still true today, as being part of the Nebraska system, but I think there was a esprit de corps that I will never forget, and there was a feeling of, you just wanted to be with people that you enjoyed being with, and you wanted the university students to be what you knew they were capable of being. And I'm sure that still exists, but I think it was a very strong attachment for me.
Thank you for this marvelous hour. It's been a joy.
Wonderful for me. Thank you, Paul.
We've been, for the last number of minutes, enjoying reflecting with Elizabeth Hill on her life and times in the series that we refer to here as Reflections in Time.